Over the past few years, Americans have been told a simple story about inflation. Prices went up, supply chains were disrupted, the economy adjusted. The numbers are now stabilizing. On paper, the crisis appears to be cooling. But for millions of households, the experience feels very different. At the center of this tension is something ordinary and unavoidable: groceries. The weekly trip to the supermarket has become a quiet indicator of deeper structural strain. This is not just about higher price tags. It is about shrinking financial margins, rising reliance on credit, shifting product quality, and the slow compression of middle-class stability. It is about stress that does not show up in economic charts, but shapes daily life in measurable ways. This is not simply a story about inflation rates. It is a story about how rising food costs are reshaping household budgets, behavior, and long-term security in the United States. When the cost of basic necessities begins to claim a larger share of income, the implications extend far beyond the checkout line. To understand what is happening, we need to look beyond the headline numbers and examine the structural, financial, and psychological effects unfolding beneath them. When people hear that grocery prices have increased by 10 or 15%, the reaction is often muted. It's not great, they say, but it's manageable. On paper, those numbers may not look catastrophic. A 10% increase does not sound like a collapse. It sounds temporary, contained, absorbable. But the real impact of rising grocery prices is not found in the percentage printed on a government chart. It is found in the percentage of your paycheck that disappears before the month is over. The real pain is not nominal. It is proportional. For decades, middle-class American households operated within a relatively stable framework. Groceries took up a predictable portion of monthly income. Housing was the largest expense. Healthcare followed. Transportation came next. Food was essential, but it did not dominate the budget. It was a controlled category, something families could plan around. But when grocery spending shifts from 10% of monthly take-home pay to 14, 15, even 16%, something structural changes. That difference may sound small, but in practical terms, it is enormous. In a household earning $5,000 per month after taxes, 10% equals $500. At 16%, that number becomes $800. That is $300 per month redirected toward the same basic necessity. Not toward luxury, not toward upgrades, toward survival. $300 per month is not a rounding error. It is a car payment. It is a portion of health insurance premiums. It is the difference between contributing to a retirement account and skipping it entirely. It is the margin that once protected a family from emergencies. And that margin is shrinking. This is where the conversation shifts from prices are up to financial architecture is changing. Household budgets are ecosystems. When one category expands, another must contract. If groceries consume more oxygen, savings suffocate. Emergency funds stall. Insurance coverage gets trimmed. Investment contributions are postponed. The budget does not stretch infinitely. It rearranges itself under pressure. For many middle-class families, the grocery bill has quietly become a destabilizing force. Not because families are spending recklessly, not because they suddenly upgraded to premium brands, but because the baseline cost of feeding a household has risen faster than take-home pay. Wages may have increased in nominal terms, but inflation absorbs those gains before they are felt. The paycheck grows slightly, the cart grows heavier in cost, the balance does not improve. What makes this shift particularly dangerous is its invisibility. A rent spike is dramatic. A medical bill is shocking. Grocery inflation is incremental. A few dollars more for eggs, a few dollars more for meat, a few dollars more for cereal. The increases are dispersed across dozens of items. Each one feels tolerable. Together, they reshape the entire monthly equation. Over time, families begin adjusting behavior. They delay replacing appliances. They reduce discretionary spending. They choose lower-cost brands. They cut back on dining out. But even after these adjustments, the higher grocery share remains. And that means less financial resilience. Resilience is what defines the middle class. It is not wealth. It is not luxury. It is the ability to absorb shocks without collapsing. When groceries move from 10% to 16% of income, resilience weakens. A car repair becomes stressful. A minor medical issue becomes disruptive. A temporary job loss becomes dangerous. This is why focusing solely on the headline percentage misses the deeper issue. Inflation at the checkout counter is not just about price tags. It is about the shrinking space between income and obligation. It is about how much of a paycheck is already spoken for before the month even begins. The real story is not that groceries are more expensive than last year. The real story is that they are claiming a larger share of financial life. And when basic necessities begin to command a growing portion of household income, the middle class does not collapse overnight. It becomes fragile, quietly, gradually, one grocery trip at a time. Most Americans are now familiar with shrinkflation. The box looks the same, the price is higher, and the contents are smaller. A bag of chips holds more air. A cereal box feels lighter. A carton that once lasted the week now runs out by Thursday. Consumers notice the reduced ounces and the subtle redesigns meant to distract from them. That story is visible, but there is a quieter layer unfolding beneath the surface. Shrinkflation is no longer just about size. It is about quality. In order to protect margins while maintaining competitive price points, many food manufacturers have reformulated their products. Recipes change. Ingredient lists stretch. Lower-cost substitutes replace higher-quality components. Protein portions shrink. Fillers increase. Sweeteners shift. Oils change. The label may still resemble the product families have trusted for years, but what is inside is often not the same. This evolution rarely makes headlines because it happens in fine print. Consumers are not comparing ingredient lists from 3 years ago. They are comparing price tags. And when the focus remains fixed on price per ounce, a deeper shift in nutritional value goes largely unnoticed. Consider the economics behind it. If a company faces higher input costs for dairy, meat, grains, or transportation, it has limited options. It can raise prices, it can reduce package size, or it can quietly adjust the formula. Reformulation often becomes the most politically invisible choice. Instead of charging more for the same product, companies sell a slightly altered product at a similar price point, sometimes with only marginal increases. The result is subtle but significant. A frozen meal that once contained a meaningful serving of protein may now rely more heavily on carbohydrates. A yogurt that once featured higher dairy content may include more stabilizers and sweeteners. A snack marketed as wholesome may contain cheaper oils and added fillers to preserve texture at lower cost. Consumers may not immediately recognize the shift, but their bodies do. When households are already pressured by rising grocery costs, they often gravitate toward lower-priced options. If those options have also been reformulated to contain less nutritional value, families may unknowingly consume more calories to achieve the same sense of fullness. Protein reduction alone can change satiety patterns. Less protein often means increased hunger later. Increased hunger can lead to higher overall consumption. Over time, this dynamic carries consequences. Lower nutritional density can contribute to weight gain, metabolic issues, and long-term chronic conditions. These outcomes do not appear in the monthly grocery budget. They appear years later in medical bills, insurance premiums, and prescription costs. What begins as food inflation can evolve into health expenditure inflation. This is where the impact becomes systemic. First, their grocery share of income increases. Second, their long-term health risk may rise. Any factor that degrades nutritional quality at scale becomes more than a consumer issue. When quality diminishes alongside affordability, it reinforces the perception that standards are slipping across the board. Even small adjustments across hundreds of commonly purchased items can accumulate into measurable dietary change across millions of households. A few grams less protein here, a few grams more refined carbohydrates there. It is a story about altered substance. In many cases, they are receiving products with reduced nutritional value. The invisible cost may surface years later in doctors' offices and insurance statements. Sometimes it arrives disguised as familiarity, packaged in the same branding, placed on the same shelf. The box looks unchanged. The price is higher, the ingredients are different, and the long-term consequences may extend far beyond the checkout line. For generations, groceries were the definition of immediate consumption. You worked, you got paid. You bought food. The transaction was simple and contained within the same financial cycle. Income covered necessity. There was no lingering obligation attached to a gallon of milk or a carton of eggs. Once consumed, it was finished. That relationship is beginning to change. Recent data shows rising credit card balances and growing use of buy now pay later services for everyday essentials, including food. At first glance, this may not seem unusual. Credit cards have long been part of American financial life. But the purpose behind their use matters. Financing a refrigerator or a laptop is one thing. Financing groceries is something else entirely. Groceries are not assets. They do not hold value. They do not last. They are consumed within days. When a family begins paying for this week's food over the next 2 or 3 billing cycles, it signals something deeper than convenience. It signals strain. If dinner is financed in installments, cash flow has already fractured. Cash flow is the lifeblood of household stability. It is not just about how much a family earns annually. It is about timing. Income arrives, expenses are paid, a surplus remains. When grocery bills begin to spill over into future months through revolving credit, the timeline shifts. Families are effectively borrowing from tomorrow to survive today. This is not a dramatic collapse. It is a quiet shift in financial behavior. Consider the mechanics. A household spends $800 on groceries in a month. Instead of paying that balance in full, it carries part of it forward at interest rates that often exceed 20% annually. That interest compounds. The next month's groceries are added to the previous balance. The burden grows gradually, often unnoticed, until the total balance becomes unmanageable. Buy now pay later services introduce another layer. These platforms divide payments into smaller installments, making purchases feel more manageable in the moment. The psychological barrier to spending decreases. The immediate impact on a bank account appears smaller, but the obligation remains. Multiple small installment plans can stack quickly, creating overlapping payment commitments that extend weeks or months into the future. What makes this trend particularly concerning is that it reflects necessity, not indulgence. Families are not financing luxury vacations or high-end electronics. They are financing bread, milk, meat, and produce. The shift suggests that for many households, regular income is no longer sufficient to cover baseline living expenses without credit support. This is survival mode. In survival mode, households make short-term decisions to preserve immediate stability. They protect rent payments. They prioritize utilities. They ensure children are fed. If credit becomes the only buffer available, it is used. But reliance on revolving debt for consumables reduces future flexibility. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar not saved, invested, or used to build resilience. Over time, the structure of household finance becomes increasingly fragile. High-interest debt erodes the margin that once allowed families to absorb shocks. An unexpected medical bill or car repair no longer fits into an already stretched budget. Instead, it compounds on top of existing balances. The mainstream conversation often focuses on inflation rates, wage growth, and consumer confidence indexes. Less attention is given to the method by which consumption is sustained. If spending remains steady but is increasingly funded by debt rather than disposable income, the appearance of stability can be misleading. Debt can mask distress. From the outside, grocery stores remain full. Checkout lines move. Sales volumes may not collapse. But behind those transactions, payment structures are changing. The cost of food is not only measured at the register, it is measured in interest charges that accumulate quietly in the background. When households begin shifting time itself to survive, extending today's expenses into tomorrow's obligations, it reveals a deeper imbalance. The issue is no longer just rising prices, it is the widening gap between income and necessity. Groceries were once the most basic expression of financial routine. Work pays for food. Food sustains life. That cycle was immediate and contained. As credit increasingly fills the gap between paycheck and plate, the cycle stretches, and when necessity depends on borrowed money, the stability of the system becomes more uncertain than it appears on the surface. Inflation is often presented as an external force. Supply chains tighten, energy costs rise, labor becomes more expensive, companies respond, prices increase. The narrative feels mechanical, almost inevitable, rising costs in, rising prices out. For many consumers, this explanation seems logical enough. But there is another dimension to consider. In recent years, several major food corporations have reported strong profits even as they publicly cited higher production costs. Earnings calls have included references to pricing adjustments, margin management, and strategic increases. In many cases, revenues have grown not only because of higher costs passed through to consumers, but because profit margins expanded. This raises an important question. Are all price increases strictly cost-driven, or has inflation created an environment in which companies can test the upper limits of what consumers are willing to pay? In highly concentrated industries, a small number of firms control large market shares. In the American food system, consolidation has been significant across processing, distribution, and retail. When fewer companies dominate shelf space, competitive pressure weakens. If one major brand raises prices, others often follow. Consumers may switch between labels, but many of those labels belong to the same parent corporations. This structure enhances pricing power. Pricing power is the ability of a company to raise prices without losing significant customer demand. In a period of broad inflation, that power can strengthen. Consumers already expect higher prices. The psychological resistance to increases declines. When inflation becomes normalized, companies can move prices upward with less backlash. The line between cost recovery and margin expansion becomes difficult to see from the outside. To be clear, production costs have risen in recent years. Commodity prices, transportation expenses, labor shortages, and energy volatility have all affected the food sector. Companies are not immune to these pressures, but the key issue is scale. When price increases outpace input cost growth, margins widen. When margins widen during a period of consumer strain, questions emerge. This is where the term greedflation enters public discourse. It is a controversial label, often politicized, yet beneath the rhetoric lies a structural issue. In markets with limited competition, firms may possess the flexibility to push prices beyond what is strictly necessary to offset costs. Not as an act of malice, but as a rational business strategy within a permissive environment. For shareholders, expanded margins represent strength. For households, they represent pressure. When consumers continue purchasing despite higher prices, companies interpret that behavior as tolerance. Demand remains stable. Revenue holds. The feedback loop reinforces itself. Inflation becomes less of a temporary disruption and more of a recalibrated baseline. Over time, temporary price hikes risk becoming permanent resets. Another layer complicates the picture. Private label brands, often perceived as budget alternatives, are frequently produced by the same manufacturers that supply premium brands. This vertical integration can limit the true scope of price competition. If cost increases ripple through the entire production network, consumers may find fewer meaningful price differences across the shelf. The issue, then, is not a simple accusation. It is an examination of structure. When industries consolidate and consumer expectations adjust upward, pricing behavior shifts accordingly. Inflation provides cover. It creates a moment when increases feel justified. The critical question is whether those increases retreat when costs stabilize. In many cases, they do not fully reverse. For American households, the distinction matters. If grocery prices remain elevated, not solely because of unavoidable costs, but also because market concentration enables sustained margin expansion, then the pressure on family budgets becomes partly structural. It reflects not just global supply conditions, but domestic corporate leverage. Inflation may begin as an economic shock, but in concentrated industries with strong pricing power, it can evolve into a new pricing regime. Consumers adjust. Companies adapt. Margins solidify. And what was once described as temporary begins to feel permanent. The grocery aisle becomes more than a reflection of supply and demand. It becomes a mirror of market power.